9:17 p.m. The scent hit her first, a cheap, cloying cologne that clung to the air like smoke, a chemical sweetness that always made her stomach clench. It was the smell of dread. Alara felt the fine hairs on her arms stand up before she even looked, her body reacting to the predator's proximity before her mind could process the image. Marcus Thorne slid into the booth at the edge of her section, his movements too smooth, too confident. He didn't look at the menu. He never did. His eyes, small and dark like polished river stones, were fixed on her. Her boss, Barry, caught her eye from behind the counter, a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe pity, before he looked away, busying himself with polishing a glass that was already clean. The unspoken message was clear. Handle it. He's a customer. But Thorne wasn't just a customer. He was her landlord. He was the shadow that followed her home, the whisper of a voice on a silent phone line, the reason she checked the locks on her door 3 times before she could even think about sleep. "Evening, Alara," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble that didn't carry past the booth. It was for her alone. "You look tired." Working too hard, he smiled, but it was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. It didn't reach his eyes. "What can I get for you, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice tight, professional. Her order pad felt slick in her sweating palm. "Just a coffee." "Black," he leaned forward, dropping his voice even lower. "And a little bit of your time. I need to stop by later. Check on that leaky faucet in your bathroom again. Make sure it's really fixed." There was no leaky faucet. There never had been. It was his excuse, the key he held to her private world, the one he used to remind her that he could enter her home, her space, her life, whenever he pleased. "It's fine, Mr. Thorne. It's not dripping." His smile widened. "I'll be the judge of that. Around 11? After your boy's asleep. We wouldn't want to wake him." Ice flooded her veins. The mention of her son, Leo, was a deliberate, precise strike. It was a reminder of her vulnerability, of the precious, fragile life she was solely responsible for protecting. Her breath hitched. Her carefully constructed wall of professional composure began to crack. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her, the low murmur of conversations, the clatter of cutlery, but it all felt a universe away. In this small, vinyl-upholstered world, there was only his suffocating presence and her own panicked heartbeat. She backed away from the booth, mumbling something about getting his coffee. Her eyes darted around the diner, searching for an exit, a shield, anything. That's when she saw him. A man sitting alone at the counter, his back to her. He was large, a mountain of denim and worn leather. A thick, graying braid hung down the back of his vest. Stitched onto the leather was a patch, a stark, angular shield forged from iron-gray thread. He hadn't moved, hadn't turned, but his presence felt like a rock in the churning sea of her fear. He was just a stranger, but in that moment he felt like the only solid thing in the room. Thorne was watching her, enjoying her terror. She could feel his gaze on her back. Acting on pure, unthinking instinct, Alara changed her path to the coffee machine. Instead of walking down the main aisle, she squeezed behind the line of stools at the counter. As she passed the big man, she slowed, letting the back of his chair become a physical barrier between her and Thorne's line of sight. For 1, 2, 3 seconds she was hidden. She was a child hiding behind her father's legs. The thick leather of his vest smelled of road dust, engine oil, and old tobacco, a scent as far from Thorne's chemical sweetness as one could get. It was the smell of something real, something grounded. In that fleeting moment of shadow, breathing in the scent of a stranger's protection, she felt a sliver of impossible hope. It was a desperate, foolish thought, but it was the only one she had. What if he could help? The moment passed. She moved on, her hands shaking as she poured Thorne's coffee. But the feeling lingered. She had found a temporary shield, and the silent man wearing it had no idea. The clock on the wall ticked past 10. Thorne nursed his coffee, his eyes never leaving her, a silent, unblinking sentinel of menace. Alara moved through the motions of her job, clearing plates, wiping tables, refilling salt shakers, with a frantic, brittle energy. Every step was calculated to keep distance, to keep a table or a customer between her and his booth. Finally, Barry called out, "Alara, you're out." And the relief was so profound it almost buckled her knees. She fled to the back, pulling off her apron and grabbing her thin coat. She slipped out the rear employee exit, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The alley was dark, smelling of grease and damp cardboard. She hurried toward the front parking lot, fumbling for her keys. And then she saw it. Thorne's dark sedan, parked near the exit, engine idling softly. He was waiting. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. This was different. He had never waited in the parking lot before. It was an escalation, a crossing of a line. Her fingers trembled so badly she could barely fit the key in her own car's lock. She got in, slammed the door, and locked it. Her gaze flew to the diner. The man with the iron shield patch was just leaving, walking toward a heavy, black motorcycle. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, a man comfortable in his own skin. He saw her. He saw her staring at Thorne's car, her face a mask of terror in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Their eyes met for a second across the asphalt. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, not of greeting but of acknowledgement. Then he swung his leg over his bike. Alara pulled out of the parking lot, her hands strangling the steering wheel. As she feared, Thorne's headlights flared to life behind her. He followed. Not close enough to be aggressive, but there. A constant, looming presence in her rearview mirror. She drove the speed limit, her mind racing. Calling 911 felt like an overreaction they would dismiss. But the thought of him showing up at 11, of him being near Leo, she couldn't bear it. She pulled her phone out, her thumb hovering over the numbers. She dialed the non-emergency line. The voice on the other end was flat, bored. "West Precinct. How can I help you?" My landlord, he's following me," she stammered, trying to keep her voice even. "I left work, and he's behind me." "Is he driving erratically? Speeding? Breaking any laws?" "No, he's just there. And he threatened to come to my apartment later tonight. He's been harassing me for weeks." The sound of typing. "Ma'am, has he physically touched you? Has he made a direct, verbal threat of violence?" "He said he was coming to my apartment at 11. He knows my son will be asleep. It's a threat." "Ma'am, a landlord stating he's coming to a property he owns isn't a criminal threat. Following you on a public road isn't illegal unless he's violating traffic laws. If you feel you're being harassed, your recourse is to file for a restraining order with the courts. We can't dispatch a unit because someone is driving behind you." The dismissal was so calm, so procedural. It was a wall of bureaucratic indifference. Her fear was not an emergency. Her terror did not fit into their neat boxes. "But you don't understand," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "This has been going on for weeks. I have notes, I have dates. You can include all of that in your petition for the restraining order, ma'am. Have a good night." The line went dead. She was alone. The system had looked at her, registered her as a minor annoyance, and turned away. In her rearview mirror, Thorne's headlights were like two malevolent eyes, patient and unblinking. And just behind them, farther back, she saw a single round headlight. The motorcycle. It kept its distance. A silent, unexpected witness in the dark. He hadn't intervened, he hadn't announced himself, but he hadn't left. He was just watching. Alara turned onto her street, the sedan still behind her. She parked, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her keys. As she bent to retrieve them, Thorne's car slowed, pulling up alongside hers. He didn't stop. He just rolled down the passenger window, the same chilling smile on his face, and mouthed the words, "See you later." Then he drove on, disappearing around the corner. She sat in her car for a full minute, unable to move, the dispatcher's bored voice echoing in her ears. A moment later, the deep, throaty rumble of the motorcycle passed by. The rider didn't look at her, just continued down the street, his single headlight cutting a path through the darkness. He was gone. The brief, fragile sense of being seen, of not being entirely alone, vanished with him, leaving her in the profound, terrifying silence of a system that would not help. She finally made it inside, locking and deadbolting the door, sliding the chain across. The apartment was small, but it was hers, a sanctuary she had built from thrift store furniture and fierce love. Leo was asleep in his room, his small form a gentle lump under a superhero-themed comforter. On the refrigerator, held by a mismatched collection of magnets, was his latest drawing. A crayon figure with a crooked smile and a cape, labeled OM. Taped next to it was a worn photograph of a young man in an army uniform, his smile easy and genuine. Sergeant Daniel Miller, her Danny, lost to an IED 6 years ago, leaving behind a hole in the world and a son who would only know him through stories. This apartment was the first place that had felt stable since he died. It was where Leo had started kindergarten, where she had painstakingly set up a small desk in the corner of the living room to study for her online nursing courses after her son was asleep. The textbooks were secondhand, their pages filled with the highlighted notes of a dozen students before her, a lineage of hope and effort. Her life was a carefully balanced structure of work, study, and motherhood, and every part of it was contained within these 4 walls. And Marcus Thorne owned the walls. She pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook from the drawer of her nightstand. The cover was plain, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at the grocery store. Inside, in her neat, precise handwriting, was a log of every interaction. April 14th. Mr. Thorne came by to check the smoke detector, stayed for 20 minutes. Asked if I was lonely. Stood too close. May 3rd. Left a note on my door saying my rent was late, even though I paid it on the 1st. Called me to discuss it. Said maybe we could work out an alternative arrangement May 21st. Texted me at 1 a.m. asking if I was awake. It was a litany of transgressions, a pattern of escalating intrusion. Each entry was a small knot of fear she had tried to document, believing that if she wrote it down, it would become real, something the world would have to acknowledge. But the bored voice of the dispatcher told a different story. Her notebook was just a collection of feelings. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't a direct threat to the world. Marcus Thorne was just an attentive landlord. To her, he was the wolf at the door and he had the key. Her nursing textbook lay open on the desk. She looked at the diagrams of the human heart, a complex organ of chambers and valves, all working in precise, life-sustaining rhythm. Her own heart felt like a trapped bird, beating against the cage of her ribs. She was studying to save lives, to bring comfort and healing, but she couldn't even protect her own son from the creeping dread that now seeped through the floorboards of their home. The photograph of Danny seemed to watch her, his smiling eyes a painful reminder of a time when she had felt safe, when she had a partner to face the world with. Now, she was a one-woman defense force, and her fortress was about to be breached. The clock on the microwave read 10:48 p.m., 12 minutes. The next 2 weeks were a slow-motion descent into hell. Thorne didn't show up that night. The presence of the motorcycle, perhaps, had given him pause, but the war of attrition began. The gifts started appearing. She would open her door in the morning to find things on her welcome mat. A single, perfect rose with its thorns meticulously removed. Then, a few days later, a small porcelain doll, the kind with vacant, staring eyes. She threw it away immediately, her hands trembling. The following week, the same doll reappeared, this time with its hair crudely chopped off. It was a message of violation, a clear and calculated piece of psychological torment that left no fingerprints. She called the non-emergency line again. "Ma'am, has he threatened you?" The new voice asked, with the same weary patience as the first. "He's leaving things at my door." A doll with its hair cut off. "It's terrifying. Did you see him leave it?" "No, but who else would it be? Without a witness or footage, there's no way to prove who left it. It's not a crime to leave a doll on a doorstep, ma'am." Her world was shrinking. The harassment was designed to be deniable, to exist in the gray spaces the law couldn't reach. Then came the final blow. She showed up for her shift at the diner, and Barry called her into his small, cluttered office. He wouldn't meet her eye. "Alara, I have to let you go," he said, his voice strained. "We've had complaints." "Complaints? From who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "A customer said you were rude, distracted, unprofessional." He finally looked at her, his face a miserable mask of capitulation. "It was Thorn. He said if you were still working here, he'd make sure all his business contacts knew about the declining service. I can't afford that, Alara." "I'm sorry." She walked out of the diner in a daze, the place she'd worked for 3 years suddenly alien to her. He had cut her off. He had severed her lifeline, her only source of income. Now, the threat wasn't just about her safety. It was about survival. How would she pay the rent? How would she buy groceries? Thorn owned her home, and now he had taken her job. He was systematically dismantling her life, piece by piece, isolating her until she had nowhere left to turn but to him. She spent the next day making frantic calls. Legal aid was her first stop. A tired but kind paralegal listened to her story, nodding sympathetically. "The soonest we can get you an appointment with an attorney is in 3 weeks, she said, handing Alara a mountain of paperwork. "A restraining order is an option, but you'll need to go before a judge. You'll need to serve him papers, and he has a right to contest it. Your notebook is good, but he'll likely say it's all lies or misunderstandings. It's your word against his." 3 weeks felt like a lifetime. The system wasn't a shield. It was a labyrinth of procedures and delays, a war of attrition that a man like Thorn, with time and money, was guaranteed to win. She felt the walls of her apartment closing in, the air growing thin. The place that had been her sanctuary was now her cage, and her jailer was the only one with the power to open the door. Despair, cold and heavy, settled over her. She was out of options, out of time, and completely, utterly alone. In the depths of that despair, a flicker of a memory surfaced. The smell of road dust and leather. The solid, reassuring presence of a stranger's back. The iron shield patch. It was a foolish, desperate long shot, a grasp at a straw in a hurricane. But it was the only straw she had left. She remembered the name of the diner from her final, crumpled pay stub. She searched for it online, scrolling through local forums and reviews. One post mentioned a biker night on Tuesdays, patronized by a local veterans motorcycle club. It listed an address, not for the club, but for a VFW post on the industrial side of town where they often gathered. Her hands were slick with sweat as she drove there, the cheap paper with the scribbled address on the passenger seat. The VFW post was a low, unassuming brick building, its windows dark. A few heavy motorcycles were parked out front, gleaming under the single, buzzing streetlight. It looked closed, forbidding. For a moment, she almost drove away. This was insane. What was she going to do? Walk in and ask a group of strangers for help because a man was leaving dolls on her doorstep? They would laugh at her. They would think she was crazy. But the image of Leo, sleeping peacefully, his face untroubled, flashed in her mind. She thought of Thorn's cold smile, his possessive gaze. Fear was a poison, but the love for her son was the antidote. It gave her the strength to turn off the engine, to open the car door, to walk toward the entrance of that quiet brick building. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped into a room thick with the smell of stale beer, old wood, and camaraderie. A handful of men sat around a large table, talking in low tones. And there, at the head of the table, was the man from the diner. His leather vest was unzipped, showing a faded army t-shirt underneath. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. The conversation died. Every eye in the room turned to her. I'm sorry to interrupt," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I saw you at the diner." The other night she addressed the large man, whose calm gaze held no judgment, only a quiet curiosity. He nodded slowly. "I remember," he gestured to an empty chair. "What's on your mind?" The other men remained silent, watching, their presence a palpable, heavy force in the room. She walked to the table, her legs feeling like lead. She pulled the small notebook from her purse and laid it on the worn wooden surface. "My landlord," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "He's harassing me. He got me fired. The police won't help. Legal aid is weeks away. He knows I'm alone." She slid the notebook toward him. "I've been writing it all down, but they say it's not enough." The man, who the others called Grizz, didn't open the notebook. Not yet. His eyes were on her face, assessing her, seeing the genuine terror that she could no longer hide. Then his gaze dropped to her purse, where the corner of a photograph was sticking out. The picture of Danny in his uniform. "Who's the soldier?" Grizz asked, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "My husband," she whispered. "He was killed in Afghanistan 6 years ago." Grizz leaned forward slightly. "What was his name?" "His unit." "Sergeant Daniel Miller, 10th Mountain Division, 2nd Brigade." A stillness fell over the room. Grizz looked at the man to his right, a man with a scarred face and an eagle tattoo on his forearm. A silent, electric current passed between them. Grizz's entire demeanor shifted. The quiet curiosity sharpened into something harder, more focused. This was no longer a stranger's problem. This was family business. He finally picked up her notebook, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle on the flimsy cover. He didn't read it. He just held it, as if weighing the truth within it. Then he looked around the table at the other men, his gaze sweeping over them, each one a veteran, each one bound by an unspoken oath. "She's a Gold Star widow," Grizz said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a command. 10th Mountain. He was one of ours. The code had been invoked. The abstract fear of a stranger had just been given a name, a rank, and a unit. Alara Miller was no longer just a frightened woman. She was the widow of a fallen brother. And the men in that room, the ironclad sentinels, had a simple, unbreakable rule that superseded all others. We take care of our own. The atmosphere in the room changed from one of quiet fellowship to one of solemn, focused purpose. Emotion was hardening into resolve. Grizz closed his hand around the small notebook, his knuckles white. He looked directly at Alara, his eyes clear and hard as iron. "You're not alone anymore," he said, and for the first time in months she believed it. The shift was immediate, a quiet but seismic event. Grizz pushed his chair back and stood. "Roadhog," he said to the man with the scarred face. "Get Sarah on the line. Tell her we have a code 99. Gold Star." The words were clipped, precise, a language of their own. A code 99 was their highest alert, reserved for situations involving the direct protection of a vulnerable member of their extended military family. The Gold Star designation elevated it further, transforming it from a request into a sacred duty. Roadhog nodded once and moved to a quieter corner of the room, his phone already to his ear. Grizz then turned to the others. "This is a Sentinel watch," he announced, his voice filling the small hall. "Tier 1. Round the clock. We are a shield, nothing more. Eyes on, hands off. Everything by the book." He pulled out his own phone, his thumb moving across the screen with practice speed, activating a text message tree. The message was simple. Code 99. Gold Star. VFW Post 72. Rally at 2200. The response was instantaneous. Across the city, across the state, phones began to buzz and chime. On a digital map in Grizz's mind, small lights began to switch on. 9 p.m. A man named Stitch, a former combat medic, was watching TV with his wife. His phone buzzed. He read the message, looked at his wife, and nodded. She understood. He stood, kissed her forehead, and went to the garage. A minute later, the guttural roar of a Harley-Davidson broke the suburban silence. 9:15 p.m. The alert came through simultaneously on their phones. They exchanged a single look, locked the shop, and rolled out 2 identical matte black bikes. 9:30 p.m. A man named Padre, a retired army chaplain, was reading in his study. The text message glowed on his phone's screen. He closed his book, put on his worn leather vest over his clerical collar, and headed for the door. The mobilization was a quiet, disciplined symphony of purpose. It was not a chaotic call to arms. It was the activation of a deeply ingrained protocol. These were not street thugs. They were former soldiers, Marines, and airmen. They were mechanics, accountants, teachers, and electricians who had traded one uniform for another. Their bond was forged not in crime, but in shared service and a common code of honor. By 10 p.m., the parking lot of VFW Post 72 was no longer empty. The low rumble of idling engines was a constant, powerful hum. The head count grew. 10 bikes became 20, then 40, then nearly 60. Men of all ages, their faces etched with life and experience, stood in small groups, waiting. The air was charged with a calm, controlled energy. A sensible sedan pulled into the lot, a stark contrast to the chrome and steel surrounding it. A woman in her late 30s with a sharp, intelligent face and a no-nonsense demeanor got out. This was Sarah Jenkins, the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. She was a pro bono lawyer who had dedicated her practice to veterans' affairs. She was the Sentinel's legal compass, the one who ensured their righteous anger was channeled through the narrow straits of the law. Grizz met her at the edge of the crowd, handing her Alara's notebook. "Here's the initial report," he said. "The target is a landlord named Marcus Thorne. Subject Alara Miller, Gold Star widow. One child, age 7". Sarah scanned the first few pages, her expression hardening. Classic pattern of coercive control and stalking. The system is designed to fail her. Grizz gathered the men. They formed a silent semicircle, their attention absolute. "Listen up," he called out. "This is a Sentinel watch. Our purpose is to provide a constant, overt, and lawful presence. We are a visible deterrent. We are witnesses." Sarah stepped forward. "I'm going to be very clear about the rules of engagement," she said, her voice cutting through the low thrum of the engines. "You will operate in two-man teams on 4-hour shifts. You will maintain a legal distance from the subject's property and from Ms. Miller herself, unless she requests an escort. You do not speak to the target. You do not engage with him in any way. You simply observe and record. Every team will have one of these." She held up a small, discreet body camera. "Everything is documented. Your presence is your statement. The law protects your right to be on a public sidewalk, in a public park, or in a public space. If law enforcement is called, you will be respectful, state that you are peacefully observing, and you will give them my card. Is that understood?" A low chorus of "yes, ma'am," and "hooah" rumbled through the crowd. "This man, Thorne, thrives in the shadows," Grizz added, his voice low and intense. "He counts on his victim being isolated. He counts on the system being slow and blind. We're going to turn the lights on. We will be the eyes the system doesn't have. We will be the community that stands with her. We are the ironclad sentinels. Let's ride." The deep rumble of 60 engines firing up in unison was not a sound of aggression, but of profound, unshakable solidarity. It was the sound of a promise being kept. The first light of dawn was painting the eastern sky a pale, bruised purple when Marcus Thorne's car turned onto Alara Street. 6:58 a.m. He had his emergency maintenance kit on the passenger seat, a toolbox he rarely opened, and a smug sense of anticipation. After the scare with the motorcycle, he had laid low for a couple of weeks, letting her stew in her fear and isolation after getting her fired. Now he figured she would be desperate, pliable. He parked his car and got out, whistling softly. That's when he saw them. 2 men, standing on the public sidewalk directly in front of her apartment building. They were large, dressed in denim and leather vests adorned with the same iron shield patch. They weren't blocking the entrance, but their presence was a silent, formidable barrier. They stood perfectly still, arms crossed, their gaze fixed not on him, but on the building's front door, protecting it. Thorne stopped, his whistling dying on his lips. He frowned. This was new. Some of her friends, maybe? He started walking toward the entrance, a dismissive sneer forming on his face. As he got closer, he noticed two more men across the street, standing by a parked truck, watching. Another two were further down the block, leaning against a brick wall, also watching. They were like statues, silent and unmoving. It wasn't a gathering. It was a perimeter. His sneer faltered, replaced by a prickle of irritation. "Can I help you?" he called out to the two men at the entrance, his voice overly loud in the morning quiet. One of them, a man with a long gray braid, turned his head slowly. It was Grizz. He didn't speak. He just looked at Thorn, his eyes flat and devoid of any emotion. The look was more unnerving than any threat. "This is private property," Thorn blustered, gesturing vaguely at the building. "You can't just loiter here." Grizz finally spoke, his voice a calm, deep baritone that carried easily. "This is a public sidewalk. We're just enjoying the morning air." He turned his gaze back to the front door of the apartment building. The dismissal was absolute. Thorn felt a flush of hot anger. The script had been flipped. He was the one who was supposed to be in control, the one who made others feel watched and uncomfortable. Now he was the one being observed, his every move silently catalogued by these stone-faced guardians. He took a step toward the entrance, his bravado returning. "I'm the owner of this building. I have business here." "Nobody's stopping you," Grizz said without looking at him. Thorn hesitated. Walking between these two human monoliths felt like passing through a gate he hadn't been invited to. His sense of entitlement warred with a new, unfamiliar feeling of apprehension. Just as he was about to push past them, a white van with a local news station logo pulled up to the curb. A reporter, a young woman with a determined look and a microphone in her hand, got out, followed by a cameraman who immediately hoisted his camera to his shoulder, its red recording light blinking to life. "Excuse me, sir," the reporter called out, striding toward Thorn. "Jenna Hayes, Channel 8 News. We got a tip about a community watch group forming to protect a local resident from harassment. Are you the property owner, Marcus Thorn?" Thorn froze. The camera was pointed directly at him. His public face, the one of a respectable local businessman, was now under the harsh, unblinking glare of a news lens. Behind him, the silent, watching men seemed to grow larger, their presence now imbued with the weight of public scrutiny. His carefully constructed world of private intimidation had just been dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. The mask of the charming landlord began to crack, revealing the raw fury and panic of a predator caught in the open. The confrontation was happening, not with a shout, but with the quiet hum of a camera and the unyielding presence of lawful protectors. The Sentinel Watch began in earnest. It was a masterpiece of disciplined psychological pressure. The ironclad sentinels were a constant, silent, and utterly legal presence. They worked in two-man teams, rotating every 4 hours like a military guard post. Two men were always visible from the front of Alara's apartment building. When she needed to go to the grocery store, two more would follow her in a discreet pickup truck, parking at the far end of the lot. When she took Leo to the park, a pair of sentinels would sit on a bench across the green, reading newspapers or simply watching the clouds. They never spoke to her unless she spoke first. They never made a single threatening gesture. They were simply there, a living, breathing shield. For Alara, the change was profound. The suffocating fear that had been her constant companion began to recede. For the first time in months, she slept through the night. When Leo played in the park, she didn't scan the perimeter for Thorn's car. She watched her son laugh as he went down the slide. The Sentinel's presence didn't erase the threat, but it contained it. It drew a line in the sand that Thorn could not cross without being seen. For Thorn, the watch was a slow-burning fuse. His power had always been in the unseen, the deniable. Now his every move was observed. He couldn't drive past her building without seeing them. He couldn't approach his own property without feeling their collective gaze. He tried to reclaim control. He called the police, his voice filled with manufactured outrage. "There's a gang of bikers intimidating my tenants. They're loitering, they're trespassing." The first time the police arrived, 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights off. A weary sergeant stepped out and approached Grizz and his shift partner. "Stitch. We got a call about you guys causing a problem," the sergeant said. Before Grizz could speak, Sarah Jenkins stepped out of her sedan, which she had parked down the street. "Officer," she said, handing him her card, "I'm legal counsel for the Ironclad Sentinels Veterans MC. These men are engaged in a peaceful, lawful community watch on public property. They have broken no laws." The sergeant looked from Sarah to the two calm, quiet bikers, then back to Thorne, who was gesticulating wildly from the curb. "They're not blocking access? Not making threats?" "Absolutely not," Sarah said. "In fact, they are all equipped with body cameras to document their lawful conduct, and any interactions," she gestured to the small devices clipped to their vests. The sergeant sighed. He knew he was being used as a tool in a civil dispute. "All right, as long as you stay on public property and don't harass anyone, there's nothing I can do." He shot a tired look at Thorne. "Have a nice day, folks." Thorne's fury was palpable. His authority had been challenged and found wanting. The very system he had used to dismiss Alara was now being used to protect her. The media attention, sparked by that first confrontation, began to grow. Jenna Hayes's initial story was a minor local piece, but it got picked up. "Biker Vets Stand Guard for Gold Star Widow" was a headline that wrote itself. It went from the local station to a regional affiliate, then to a national news aggregator. The story went viral. And with the attention came a new, unexpected development. The dam of silence began to break. A woman named Maria, who had rented an apartment from Thorne 3 years prior, saw the story. She contacted Sarah Jenkins. "He did the same thing to me," she said, her voice shaking. "The late-night calls, the inspections. I moved out, broke my lease, just to get away from him." Another call came from a young woman who had worked for Thorne at one of his other small businesses. She told a story of unwanted advances and veiled threats to her job. One by one, the ghosts of Thorne's past stepped out of the shadows, drawn forward by the light of Alara's story and the Sentinel's public stand. Sarah Jenkins and her small pro bono team worked tirelessly. They took sworn affidavits. They collected phone records. They cross-referenced timelines. Alara's small, lonely notebook was no longer just hearsay. It was now the first chapter in a thick, growing file. It was the cornerstone of a case that documented not a single incident, but a deeply ingrained, predatory pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. The silent, individual screams of Thorne's victims were finally being woven together into a single, undeniable roar. The mounting public pressure became a force the city could no longer ignore. The viral news stories, the growing chorus of victims, and the quiet, unyielding presence of the ironclad sentinels created a perfect storm. The district attorney's office, which had previously been as dismissive as the police, was now fielding calls from the mayor's office and state representatives. An official investigation was announced. It began with the stalking and harassment charges, but as investigators dug, the rot proved to be deeper than anyone imagined. Empowered by the Sentinel Watch, which guaranteed no lost files or intimidation, city inspectors reviewed Thorne's properties. They found a litany of flagrant code violations he had been allowed to ignore for years through a combination of charm, threats, and likely bribes. Fire hazards, faulty wiring, illegal subdivisions, a pattern of negligence that put dozens of low-income families at risk. Financial investigators, prompted by the DA, subpoenaed his bank records and found evidence of tax evasion and fraudulent loan applications. The investigation into his harassment of Alara had peeled back the first layer of an onion of corruption. The arrest, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. It wasn't a dramatic raid. 2 plainclothes detectives approached Thorne as he was leaving his lawyer's office. They informed him he was under arrest. There was no one to intimidate, no one to dismiss. His power, which had always been personal and direct, was useless against the impersonal, grinding machinery of the state, once it had finally been pointed in his direction. The trial was a public spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day. In the back rows, a rotating contingent of ironclad sentinels sat in silent solidarity. They wore their vests, their iron shield patches a quiet testament to the promise they had made in the VFW hall. Their presence was not for intimidation, but for support. It was a message to Alara, and to every other victim who testified. You are not alone. We see you. We stand with you. When Alara took the stand, her voice was clear and steady. She wasn't the trembling, terrified woman from the diner. She looked at Thorne, who sat at the defendant's table looking small and diminished in an ill-fitting suit, and she told her story. She read entries from her notebook, her simple, factual log now carrying the weight of a dozen other voices. Thorne was found guilty, not just of stalking, but of multiple counts of witness intimidation, tax fraud, and criminal negligence related to his properties. The sentence was severe. As the judge read it aloud, a quiet sense of justice settled over the courtroom. It wasn't the fiery justice of revenge, but the cold, hard, and deeply satisfying justice of the law properly served. In the aftermath, Thorne's assets were seized, his empire of fear and neglect dismantled. A respected local housing nonprofit, working in partnership with Sarah Jenkins's newly formed Advocacy and Accountability Project, was appointed as receiver for his properties. Their first act was to contact Alara. They offered her the apartment, rent-free for 1 year, as a form of restitution and a foundation to rebuild her life. The locks were changed, and this time she was given the only key. 6 months later, Alara sat at her small desk, the one she had once used for frantic, late-night studying fueled by fear. Now the fear was gone. She wore a crisp set of light blue nursing scrubs, her textbook open to a chapter on pediatric care. She was excelling in her program, her focus no longer fractured by anxiety. Leo's laughter echoed from the living room, where he was building a tower of blocks, the afternoon sun streaming through the window of their safe, secure home. The shadow of Marcus Thorne had lifted completely, leaving only the quiet, steady rhythm of a life reclaimed. The ripples of that night at the VFW post had spread far beyond Alara's apartment. The ironclad Sentinels, under the legal guidance of Sarah Jenkins, formalized their Sentinel Watch into a registered non-profit organization, the Code 99 Project. Their mission was simple and powerful: to provide lawful, documented, protective overwatch for victims of stalking and intimidation who had been failed by the system. They developed a precise training protocol based on the Thorne case, emphasizing legal boundaries, de-escalation, and meticulous documentation. The model was revolutionary in its simplicity. It wasn't about violence or vigilantism. It was about presence. It was about turning the tools of the harasser, observation and psychological pressure, into a shield for the victim. The project attracted volunteers from beyond the biker community. Retired police officers, school teachers, union workers, and other veterans joined their ranks, trading their old uniforms for a simple vest or jacket bearing the project's logo. A small, unassuming iron shield. Grizz and Sarah found themselves leading workshops, training new chapters that were springing up in other cities. They stood before a new group of volunteers in a community hall. A diverse crowd of ordinary people moved to action. The system is overwhelmed, Grizz told them, his voice resonating with quiet authority. It has blind spots. We are not here to replace the law. We are here to be the neighborhood watch on a bigger scale. We are the eyes and ears that make sure no one has to stand alone in the dark. The final scene of the story unfolded not in a courtroom or an office, but in the local park where Alara often took Leo. A new, brightly colored playground was being installed, replacing the old, rusted equipment. The project was funded by a combination of a city grant, pushed through by a council now eager to show its support for community safety, and hundreds of small donations that had poured in after the story went national. Alara and Leo stood with Grizz and Sarah, watching a crew of volunteers, some in Code 99 vests, hoist a new slide into place. At the entrance to the playground, a small bronze plaque was being affixed to a stone pillar. It didn't bear the names of any politicians or donors. It simply read, "This place of joy and safety is dedicated to the quiet courage of all who stand watch." Below the words was a single, small, etched emblem, the stark, angular shape of an iron shield. It was a permanent symbol of a community's transformation, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force for justice isn't a weapon or a verdict, but the simple, unwavering presence of good people refusing to look away.